Welcome to the virtual happy half hour. We'll be getting started in about 1 minute. We'll be getting started in about 30 seconds. Welcome to the virtual happy half hour. While we're waiting for folks to join, just a note that this webinar will be recorded and sent out to participants. Hello, everyone, and welcome to our 6th virtual happy half hour. I'm Michelle Richardson of the Sales Performance Research Center, joining you from North Carolina. I have Russ, our Director of Facilitation and Coaching, coming to you from California. Our happy half hour is a weekly series designed to help us all navigate this environment, especially right now where the outlook and the challenges seem to be changing on a daily basis. Today's topic is the reopening economy and the changing sales role. And it's certainly a fitting issue as we've heard more and more in the news about when we transition out of this current environment and how that's going to happen. A quick housekeeping item, this webinar will be recorded and distributed to the participants afterwards. You can also find previous recordings of our webinars on our website, that's brooksgroup.com. Navigate to the resources tab and the virtual happy half hour webinar landing page. We're also posting research briefs now on a weekly basis, which is just a 1 to 2 page summary of our research and data on each of the topics that we're covering here in these webinars. We're also joined by producer Rich, who is providing tech support and monitoring the Q&A. So if you have any technical issues, please reach out to Rich directly. Today's webinar is brought to you by the Brooks Sales Leader Forum. And I know Russ and I both have the privilege of moderating these leadership forums. Russ, why don't you tell us a little bit about them?
Leadership forums are small groups, about 8 sales leaders who meet once a week for an hour and talk about the real issues they're seeing in what I like to call real time. What are the things that are coming up both with their teams, with their customers, with their management as they think about kind of what's going to happen throughout the course of the rest of the year. We spoke this last week about planning assumptions by quarter that they're bringing to their management as a part of their forecasting process. So the forums are free to participate. We'd encourage people to be able to join. Rich will put an email address, but if you send an email to forum@thebrooksgroup.com, we have new groups forming literally every week. And we're also talking about starting one in Spanish. So if you have an interest in doing a group in Spanish, please note when you send that email to forum and we will make sure you get into the right group. Thanks, Michelle. And as always, it's great to be here. This is a great topic to talk about this week. A new phrase that I read this week, so I didn't come up with it, but I really like is we're not headed towards the new normal. We're headed towards the next normal. And so what we really want to do is to be able to bring ideas that will help you and your team in this half hour find things to put to work immediately. As our chief officer said this week, we live in a time of visible ambiguity, and we need all the best input that we can get. So thank you for your survey responses. Thanks for being a part of this webinar. Continue to ask for questions or for chats that we can address at the end of the webinar. because we want this to be really valuable and directed at exactly what you're looking for. So with that, let's start talking about some of the survey data this week. Michelle?
Thanks, Russ. So we've been tracking data for about 6 weeks now, and this week we're showing it to you a little bit differently. Wanted to focus on the trends and what we're seeing from the beginning of this environment, which was the week of March 20th, to the midpoint, which was week ending April 3rd, to our current week, April 24th. So a few trends to note here. The number of organizations that are significantly behind plan continues to increase, and we're at almost 50% of the organizations completing this survey are significantly behind plan. The number of organizations that were right where they should be obviously has changed quite dramatically as well. So almost a little over 20% when we started 6 weeks ago, now down to about 5%. And also something I think that's definitely worthy of note is there are still organizations that are slightly ahead of plan. So we know that there are organizations that are doing well in this current environment. And it's a small number, but they're there and they're holding steady. We also have been tracking the length of time that this pandemic will have on organizations' business results. And again, as you can see, we're showing you the trends this week. And from the week of March 20th to the midpoint, April 3rd, to our current date. And some trends to note here. Obviously, when we got started about 6 weeks ago, I think while there was a lot of uncertainty, we were still relatively optimistic about the length of time. We're now 6 weeks into this pandemic. And as you can see at that point, a little over 25% of the organizations reporting thought we'd be coming out of it at this point. I think the biggest trend that we're seeing right now is that this impact should last beyond even the second, third quarter. Over 30% are now projecting that they will feel the business impacts through the end of 2020. And obviously, you know, there's a lot of reasons for this. I think one thing that we have all come to realize is that as we move out of this current environment, we're not going to be able to just flip a switch and have the economy reset and have our organizations reset to where they were, say, 8 weeks ago. And I think that's certainly impacting the business impact that our organizations are going to be seeing. We're also tracking the greatest challenge your sales teams are experiencing right now. So this is in the moment, what are the biggest challenges that sales teams are fearing? And I think 6 weeks ago, there was a lot of uncertainty. There was just that transition from moving from a face-to-face field sales environment to having to work through digital tools and remote selling. This week, what we're seeing by far is lead generation as the biggest issue. Many of you are reporting that just trying to generate new leads is a challenge. And in fact, we're going to actually be talking about that next week. So that's going to be our topic of next week's survey and our Happy Half Hour webinar topic. That's next Friday on May 1st. We're also going to be doing a 90-minute deep dive in a couple of weeks on lead generation. So if you're interested in getting more information about that, email us at webinar@thebrooksgroup.com, and I believe Rich will put that email address up as well. Another big issue and challenge that sales teams are experiencing right now are stalled deals. So many organizations, particularly those in capital equipment, are seeing that their deals are being pushed out. A lot of you are having canceled deals, but many, many more of you are even just having them pushed out. Your customers are uncertain, not quite ready to make a decision at this point. Their financing is on hold, and so you're seeing those deals pushed out. That in turn then goes back to lead generation, right? Because now you need to fill the pipeline with more deals. A third common challenge that we're seeing is around collections. So collections are obviously an issue. We've been tracking that data as well. 42% of you are saying, yes, collections are an issue, but we're not doing anything differently right now. 37% are reconfirming credit status, and 28% are having sales reps contact the customers to discuss credit. but that is certainly an issue. Production slowdowns, product availability. So for those of you who are actually selling, if you've got manufacturing in international areas, you may have trouble getting product in time and maybe back ordered. And I think the other big issue is maintaining optimism in this time. So there's still a lot of uncertainty. Many organizations are furloughing or laying off sales teams, and that's certainly playing into the mindset. So as the economy reopens, what is the likelihood that your sales organization will change in the following areas? And earlier we mentioned that based on the data and everything we're seeing up to this point, that it's unlikely we're going to get just a clean reset, flip the switch, and everything goes back to kind of the old normal, right? So what are the likelihood that organizations are going to need to make changes? And as you can see in the topics that we are presenting, there's everything is kind of hovering right around that neutral stage, right? Either just above or just below. And what that really says is that the responses were kind of across the board. So let's kind of dig into those. So with quota, 54% of organizations reporting are actually likely to make some adjustments to quota. So they are considering whether they need to revisit that topic. 43% are neutral to extremely unlikely. Relative to compensation, these numbers are just literally spread across the board. 25% of you are somewhat unlikely to make adjustments to compensation. Another 20% of you are somewhat likely, and 20% are right there in the middle at neutral, not sure one way or the other at this point if you're going to be making changes. From territory realignment, organizations don't seem inclined to make changes here yet. 28% of you are somewhat unlikely, 20% extremely unlikely. So that's falling more on the less likely side. On the size of sales team, about half the organizations surveyed do see a likelihood of making changes coming out of this current environment. 31% of you are extremely likely, 20% of you are somewhat likely to be changing the size of your sales team. 32% of you are not likely to be addressing this. And then in terms of the types of sales roles that we're seeing, about half the organizations, again, do see a likelihood of making changes to the sales role. 25% of you are somewhat likely, and 23% of you are extremely likely. So about a week ago, Harvard Business Review published an article on the 4 things that organizations must do to adapt to crisis. And they specifically talked about the sales teams and the types of sales roles that might be needed and the changes in terms of selling. And the point was that increased digital selling may be here to stay in some form or fashion, and that organizations may be rethinking the size of their teams, the expectations for success, now that organizations have had to make some quick pivots in this particular environment, that some of those pivots may actually become permanent moving on. So I think that's definitely something to keep an eye on moving forward.
I think, Michelle, the other thing they've recently published is some looks back at the 2008 financial crisis and found that companies that used it as a chance to kind of rethink some of their business practices tended to both rebound faster as well as overall gain market share in the 2 years following the crisis. So, our encouragement to people, and frankly, to me, this was a little disheartening that most of our people came out with sort of like no change is likely. I think real opportunity for people to be thinking about what do they do and how can they do it better, because this is the challenge I think we all face in this next normal world we're headed to.
Absolutely. We got a quick question. Is the role of salespeople really changing, or is it that there are different channels to replace face-to-face meetings and travel? And I think it's both. I think that from what I've seen and read anyway, that these new channels that replace face-to-face is having an impact on the role of the salesperson. So you may find that a field salesperson does a mixture of face-to-face, kind of in-person, live, and virtual. So I think that's definitely it's a twofold and kind of intertwined issue there. Our sample size, by the way, our total sample size is over close to 400 organizations, and they are in a range of industries, and they are global responses.
Most of them business to business, right?
Correct.
Michelle?
Yes, correct. So
All right.
Russ, tell us a little bit more about the Sales Leadership Forum.
Well, we've talked about the Sales Leadership Forum every week for the last 5 weeks, I guess. But I wanted to share a little bit on kind of what do they do. So when we get together and we talk for an hour and share ideas, it's really kind of an open forum. But just so you know, last week we talked about things like, what are buyers thinking right now? Is it any easier to get to them this last week than it was the first week or two of the crisis? And what ideas have you been giving to your team in terms of being able to reach those buyers? I mentioned earlier, planning assumptions for the rest of 2020. What are you using as the asterisks, if you will, around the numbers that you expect? And it was interesting to me to be able to see that people gathered all sorts of information, even in the business to business space, things like, performance of retailers and cash on hand at retailers to look at maybe what was going to drive their business. We talked about staffing optimization in one of the forums, and they had a much better colloquial phrase for it than I can use here online. But essentially, how do you replace your lower performers with people who are really ready to go, especially if your competitors have hit a soft patch and off some of their good folks? Is now a time to kind of beef up in those areas and grab those folks. And then we also talked about, how do you make virtual work? Is it working better than you expected? Is it working not as well as you expected? So again, real-time issues addressed every week in those forums. So if you'd like to join a forum, again, we're thinking about even forming one in Spanish, if that's a language you're more comfortable with, then email us at forum@thebrooksgroup.com. So let's talk about sort of the reopening economy. Where are we going and what does it look like? First, I want to share with you just a couple of guidelines. These are from the federal government. They were released April 16th. So that was only 8 days ago, but in some ways it could seem like it's a long, long time ago. And they talk about opening things in stages or phases. So phase one for them is where we continue to social distance. We keep groups down to less than 10. Minimize non-essential travel. And when you do travel, you have to self-isolate. One of the things, for example, that we talked about in our forum this week was if someone takes a trip to Canada, it's 2 weeks into Canada and then a 2-week isolation, have your meeting, fly home, and then depending on your state, it's another 2 weeks. So a one-day meeting in Canada can cost you 31 days or 29 days. So you're not going to be doing that very often. The vulnerable are to stay home, and they're really encouraging work from home. This is pretty much where we've been, if you think about it, for the last 4 weeks, something like that. Then phase two, this is the one that's starting to open up. Within phase two, you see groups being able to grow up to just less than 50 people. Non-essential travel resumes. So you can put people out on the road either for vacations or for your business to be able to go visit clients. The vulnerable, the elderly, those with underlying conditions stay at home, but they're starting to open schools and campuses. Bars and restaurants are open as long as they separate things off by 6 feet. The key point sort of between phase one and phase two, and even phase three, is you have a lot of voices that are being involved in this. You not only have the federal government, all of the state governments are weighing in, county governments and mayors. And I've seen kind of all of those take place. As we all know, Georgia is opening up today, certain businesses, but not all businesses. And yet inside of Georgia, there are mayors who are saying, that's not going to happen in my city, or that is, or we're going to move faster, or we're going to move slower. And then phase three is kind of when we're really back to sort of this final phase. The vulnerable get to go out, but it's social distancing, probably wearing face masks. Offices start to reopen. Large venues start to reopen as long as you've physically distanced. If you haven't noticed, all of the airlines this week have announced they will no longer sell middle seats for probably phase two and parts of phase three. So if you travel, that's one case. And bars and restaurants, you can go back to what they call standing room only. So I assume that means packed people side by side. The other thing that's going to play into this are state guidelines. And as a California resident, I brought up what our California Governor Newsom announced about, again, about a week ago, a little over a week ago. And he had these 6 things that were important to him. He wanted better testing so that we can understand what % of the population has it, who maybe has antibodies, and whether or not that means immunity or not. The second piece is you need to be able to protect those who are at severe risk, whether that's staying home or hospital capacity, some kind of vaccines or therapeutics. Next is to be able to have surge capacity. So not just can you protect them, but what's going to happen if your hospitals are overrun like we've seen in New York and some other parts of the world. How do you have some kind of treatments? And those are, again, multiples going through FDA approval cycles right now. They expect that there will be some available in the early fall. Redrawn floor plans. This is an interesting one to me. If you know Cushman and Wakefield, they are a large commercial real estate firm. They've actually released a new prototype they call the 6-foot office that looks at traffic patterns and everything else. So if you're in charge of or part of a team looking at opening up your physical space, you might want to check out Cushman and Wakefield and look for that 6-foot office. And then finally, be ready to shift back. And I think this is the big thing we all don't want to have happen. We all want the economy opened up as quickly as possible, but the last thing we want is to be out there for a month and then told, oops, back into shelter in place. That doesn't work. So those are kind of the state guidelines. Your states will vary. These kind of form the Washington, Oregon, California, and probably are on the stricter end of the rules. Other states will be less. So let's talk about what the sales challenges are then that make that happen. There are 3 that I kind of see right now. One is that it's still going to be hard to interact with your customers. They're going to have staggered office hours. There's going to be a lot of work from home. The Wall Street Journal in a poll yesterday said that they think the number of people working from home, either full or part-time, is likely to double as a result of this. So imagine kind of half access, if you will, to your buyers. When you get ready to go call on them, there's going to be some questions about, personal protective equipment. Have you got it for your salespeople? It was interesting that in one of our surveys, it showed that about 60% of the organizations, a little over, are going to leave whether or not their people should wear a face mask up to them. And again, they're balancing what do they believe is safe with what I heard yesterday is, part of what I do to sell is smile. When people can't see my smile, it takes away some of my effectiveness. And it takes away my ability to clearly communicate. But there's other things to consider, and I'd encourage you to talk about these at the appropriate time with your teams. What do you do if a buyer sticks his hand out to shake hands with you? Are you willing to shake that hand and then be careful for the next hour? Or do you say, I'm not shaking hands right now? And how will that be received in your industry? You'll not be able to likely bring food into the meetings. So if you were the donut guy and you always brought donuts or coffee or bagels, they're going to look at all that very suspect, as well as saying, hey, you want to come out to lunch? Let's just go down to the corner and grab a sandwich. Those will also be tougher options. And then the final one that I hadn't thought of before I started kind of doing some research on this is, how are you going to maybe take temperatures? Who are you going to let into the building? And what are your reporting responsibilities? So now let's say you've got a group of inside salespeople or customer service. They're physically separated. Somebody starts coughing. Do you make it an option for the people around them to report them? Do you make it mandatory for the sake of everyone? It's a real tough cultural dynamic question that we think you ought to think about. Second is that we don't think that buying patterns really change all that quickly. As long as there is some level of uncertainty as we move through this reopening, projects are still going to remain kind of frozen. And so it's going to be important in that to make sure that, again, as we said earlier, align yourself as closely as you can to the critical mission or core mission of the organization. Talk to your buyers about how they see opening up their company, what that means for their customers, and how your products play into it. And then, as Michelle said earlier, a growing number of our survey people are saying that there may be some financial stability concerns there. And then the third piece to think about is just your own sales team. We kind of talked about a little bit of this. Age and health considerations. We said that kind of a break between 50 and younger, ready to get back out on the road and shake hands. Those 55 and older or with underlying health conditions, particularly smoking, for example, need to be something you think about. And these are going to take some real leadership. I think the last bullet there is one we haven't had to deal with much. We live in a society that has polarizing positions sometimes in certain opinions, and clearly this virus is no different. Some of your people are going to think the whole thing's overblown and they want to get out right away. Some of your people are going to feel like it's much more dangerous and are going to want to hold back. Your customers are too. So how are you going to take all that matrix of, salespeople and customers that it's nothing, and customers and salespeople who think it's big, kind of mix them and make good sales calls. And then anticipate some new challenges as well, not just what we're going to continue. Number one, and I think this is really significant, customer meetings will likely be shorter. We're already seeing that you may not get into a facility. You may call a buyer on a cell phone. The buyer comes out, you meet in the lobby, or you meet outside at 6-foot distances. And it means that there's going to have to be shorter, more focused conversations in that time that you get. And by the way, our survey data supports this. More than 50% of the respondents said there will be fewer in-person meetings than there used to be. And 44% said there'll be less people entering sites than there was before. Also, if you run a showroom or a facility, that's probably going to have lower foot traffic. So you need to think about the impact that has on your business as it lags, for the next X period of weeks or months, and no one knows what that is. Second, the interaction. We talked already about a shorter, more focused conversation, but you've got to make sure that the value is clearly communicated, how you both discover what's important from a value perspective and how you communicate it. Virtual will continue. We found out in our forums this week that many organizations are having more success with virtual than they were expecting. And as a result of that, they're going to continue to use it, especially in cases where you live, say, 2 states away from where your customer is, and the states in between have very different rules about you getting across. We did learn this week that, and this is good if you are a salesperson who travels, since trucking is an essential industry, truck stops are also an essential industry, and they've been ordered to open their restrooms so that if you're buying gas, you have the chance to be able to go in, because the old fast food restaurant kind of things just don't work anymore. And then also showing up in the survey, and I think Michelle mentioned this, that just over half of our folks are saying they're going to use more inside salespeople or more account retention people as they go forward. And then the last kind of anticipator, in a really broad way, is around your sales process. Travel is going to be tricky. There's no doubt about that in terms of different rules, in terms of people not wanting to go. We talked about kind of traveling, but even me as a person from California, if I were to fly to Texas right now, I would go through a 2-week mandatory quarantine before I could make sales calls in Texas. So that means there may need to be some additional territory alignment or thinking about kind of where you're going to go. Survey data, 57% said less travel is very likely as you go forward in this new world. Getting salespeople back to full compensation. The longer this goes on and they're either behind in quota performance, or some people have maybe had to reduce base salary, that's going to be an issue your people are going to keep coming back to. It's one where you can turn it around. We sell our way out of reduced compensation, but it's going to be something that drags on them from a personal perspective. And then the final thought, as Michelle said, is this really lead flow requires new strategy. And so we wanted to share one final idea as we wrap up today. This is something that we teach as a part of our plans. It's what we call a prospecting plan. If you're interested, you could take a screenshot, or we'll get it posted kind of alongside the recording of this webinar. But the idea is you ask yourself the question, what is it going to take to get more leads? And if you can't read that, it says that you've got a strategy in terms of, what are we going to go do? Then the next one is, what are your objectives? What can you measure in terms of how you're going to do it? And then what are some of the tasks? And so here's kind of an idea. Brainstorm at your next all-team sales meeting. What are some new strategies or new ideas? Or how do we take things that have worked in the past and use them now. And maybe it's, maybe it's a reconfigured way to do lunch and learns, or perhaps it's a different way to attend association meetings, or maybe it's a new way to do cold calling that doesn't just always look the same. And then assign sort of those strategies off to 1 or 2 people to go work on over the course of the next week or 2 weeks. Have them think through what the objective is in terms of how do you know you're being successful? What number of leads do you want to generate, or how many calls do you need to make? How many times do you need to invite somebody to a virtual lunch and learn to see if it works? And then have them come up with some tasks. And then when you get back together, share those as an open group to be able to communicate what you learned. And so use your team to both learn and to teach each other. I think those are kind of the key things. Again, I wanted to share that we are right now scheduling a 90-minute workshop for the week of May 4th on generating leads. We're going to talk about it a little bit next week, but again, in this kind of format of a half hour, it's hard to go too deep. So if you're interested in being a part of that webinar, that workshop, we'd encourage you, it'll be virtual, send an email to webinar@thebrooksgroup.com, and we'll send out information the first part of next week on time of day and associated cost and those kinds of things. Remember, we've all got to sell our way out of this. We don't get out of it any other way with our companies. So we've had some questions come in. We want to maybe address those. Are we asking about the likelihood of new or difference capabilities, sales, account managers, sales managers? Right now, we've not asked specifically about those roles other than just how they see the counts changing. But that might be something as we dig deeper we might want to look at. How do I think how sales managers are prepared to do coaching in this new virtual world? Very good question. I think that the coaching in terms of the basic sales process activities haven't changed a lot, but how you help them in certain areas around prospecting, for example, has. And it's a part of why we came out with our micro module series, about a 10-minute quick sort of refresher on ideas for those around prospecting, positioning, how you set up your virtual office. And I think that's a question we need to think more about. And I'm going to make a note to maybe see that as potentially a future topic for this webinar. I looked at our statistics the other day, and the vast majority of you, well over 2/3 of you, are either sales managers with additional business owners. So management and coaching is a key issue for folks. The Sales Leadership Forum, really it's open to anybody who is a sales leader, who is managing people or managing a channel, say dealers or representatives. We have not formed our Spanish group yet, but we are looking to do that. So if that's something you'd like, email us. If you know other sales executives who would prefer Spanish over English, invite them to send an email to forum@thebrooksgroup.com, and we'll do that too. And then the last one, can I clarify, if I live in California and have a sales meeting in New York, I need to get to New York and quarantine upon arrival, or do I need to quarantine prior to departure? Rules vary by state to state. I got this information off of the United website originally, but United says and again, I didn't look at New York, I'd have to go back and do that. So you can look at your favorite airline and what they're saying. Again, I looked for it in California to Texas, but if I land and terminate my flight, so not change planes, but I terminate in Dallas or Houston or Austin, I have to then go somewhere in quarantine for 14 days before I take the call. And I don't know whether you can get away with saying, oh, I've been quarantined for 14 days before I came to that. Again, I think that's going to vary on a state-by-state basis. And then when I come home to California, California has also rules on quarantining. As do, by the way, if you're thinking about international sales, international does as well. If you are thinking about air travel, I was on a forum this week where most people believe, frequent flyers, they're going to be able to start doing both domestic and a smaller number, but also some international travel built around quarantine time in July. So that's when they see this currently kind of ending. So that's what I know, but check out your state's website and the state you want to travel to's website or your airline website for state-to-state traffic. We are a little past the bottom of the hour. If there's any more questions, please feel free to chat them or bring them in. Meanwhile, how do you get ready? Expect the customer interaction is going to remain challenging. Talk about what that's going to look like because your reps may be challenged. It's not going to be the day after your business reopens is not going to look like the day before it closed. Projects are still going to be waiting for normalization. There's going to be new rules around how your team has to be performed to be safe. And I think the idea of your salesperson bringing in a virus, if it's tracked back to them, would not be well received by most customers. We all understand there's a risk. So how do you make sure your people are prepared and ready? And then be ready for shorter meetings so you can get to that value really key. Make sure that, that you're focused on what those really critical issues are that define and show your value. And it's going to be partially virtual. And you're going to have to not be able to bring along, food. It's going to be a very different experience for some sellers. And then finally, be ready for sales process challenges, specifically as it relates to travel as well as lead generation. And as Michelle said, we're going to do a lead generation seminar next time. And we just had a comment came in that said the exact same thing. Prospecting for new business is going to be tough. There was some debate in one of our forums this week, whether that means companies will stick with existing vendors longer. But then we've also seen data from some folks that say that companies are looking to broaden their supply base because of shortages in their chain. So I think that's why prospecting and lead generation is a timely topic. And as we said, we'll focus on that in next week's webinar.
Russ, we got another question in on, do we relax the rules on metrics or do you pressure reps more during virtual settings? And I'm thinking it's maybe you change the metrics a little bit, but I'd love your thoughts on that too.
Yeah, I think it's going to depend on your metrics. In the past, most of the folks that we work with have a metric around initial contacts, which has historically been over the phone, as well as a number on meetings. And you're going to have to determine either all meetings count, whether it's virtual or physical, or start to shape some metrics around physical. I think the challenge with trying to give them a metric around physical is it's going to vary state by state and territory by territory. It may vary based on customer by customer, whether they'll see your rep. It may vary on rep by rep, whether they're able to get out based on age, health, etc. So.
And we actually did a happy half-hour session on KPIs. What are the new KPIs to be looking for in this environment? So that is posted on our website, and that's brooksgroup.com under the resources tab and virtual happy half hour. It was the second week that we did our webinars, and I believe it was managing the suddenly remote sales team. So if you want to check that out, you may see some more ideas as well.
We also had a question, is there a website where you can go and register more topics? We don't have a specific website for that. You can find, as Michelle said, the previous webinars are online for replay. But if you have a topic, you're more than welcome to email us at webinar@thebrooksgroup.com, and we will consider all of those topics as we plan forward. In fact, we'd love for you to do that because, again, it's important to us that these be directed towards what you're facing right now. And I think that's all we've got for today. So everyone, have a great and safe weekend. My wife and I are thinking about getting away. We're going to go to the living room this weekend to do something different. But whatever you do, stay safe, and we'll talk to you again next Friday.
Thank you.